I've been a volunteer with Gallatin County Search and Rescue for 11 years now. Before that, I was a paramedic in Bozeman for almost a decade. I say that because I want you to understand something about me. I'm trained to work with people in crisis. I've held pressure on arterial bleeds at car accidents. I've talked down suicidal teenagers on bridge overpasses. I've delivered bad news to families in hospital corridors at 2 in the morning. I am not a person who rattles easily, and I'm not a person who fabricates stories for attention. What I'm about to describe happened over the course of about 6 weeks in the summer and early fall of 2019. If you find this account useful, or if it resonates with something you've experienced, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. These stories deserve to be heard. I need to start with the original disappearance because without it, the return makes no sense. In August of 2011, a 31-year-old man named Darren Velick entered the backcountry on a solo camping trip. He'd reserved a permit for a site along the upper Hyalite drainage. Site 7, which sits at about 7,000 feet in a lodgepole basin south of Hyalite Peak. Standard 3-night permit. His vehicle, a gray 2004 Tacoma, was found at the Hyalite Creek trailhead 5 days after his permit expired. The truck was locked. His wallet was in the glove box. There was a half-empty Nalgene in the cup holder. I was not involved in the original search. In 2011, I was still working EMS and hadn't yet joined the SAR unit. But I've since reviewed the case summary because it became relevant to me personally. The initial search lasted 9 days. They deployed ground teams, dog teams, and a Civil Air Patrol overflight. They found his campsite at Site 7, tent still staked, sleeping bag inside, cook kit arranged on the bear box. His boots were at the tent vestibule. His day pack was gone. One trekking pole was leaning against the bear box. The other was never recovered. The working theory was a day hike gone wrong. He'd left camp in trail runners with his day pack and one pole, and something had happened. A fall, a creek crossing, a medical event. The terrain south of Site 7 rises steeply into loose talus and cliff bands. It's not technical, but it's consequential. A misstep above the tree line up there, and you could slide 200 feet into a boulder field that would take a team weeks to search thoroughly. They never found him. The case went to cold status in November 2011. I know because I eventually pulled the file. Now, early July 2019. I'd been doing SAR work for about 5 years at that point. My role in the unit had shifted over time. I started as a ground searcher, just a body in a line, walking grid patterns. By 2019, I was functioning primarily as an operations coordinator for call-outs in the Hyalite drainage. That meant I managed search planning, team deployment, GPS tracking of field teams, and communication with the sheriff's office. I'd also become the person who interviewed reporting parties. If someone called in an overdue hiker in my zone, I took the initial statement. On July 9th, a Wednesday, I got a call from Gallatin County Dispatch at about 10 in the morning. A couple had been backpacking along the Hyalite Creek trail and encountered a man near the trailhead who appeared to be in distress. He was sitting on a log just off the trail about a quarter mile from the parking area. They described him as disoriented, thin but not emaciated, wearing clothing that was heavily worn but not what they called homeless looking. Their words. He apparently asked them what year it was. When they told him, he didn't react the way they expected. He didn't seem shocked. He just nodded, they said, like he was confirming something. They offered him water and he declined. They asked if he needed help and he said no. They hiked out, reached the trailhead, and called it in because something about the interaction bothered them enough that they couldn't let it go. I was at the trailhead within 40 minutes. I drove up with another volunteer, Marcus, who handles medical assessment for our unit. When we arrived, the parking area was mostly empty. 2 cars, neither of which was the man's, as far as we could determine. We started up the trail. We found him almost exactly where the couple had described. Quarter mile in, just off the south side of the trail, sitting on a downed log. He was wearing a sun-faded long-sleeve shirt, khaki pants that had been patched at both knees with what looked like duct tape, and old trail runners that were worn through at the toes. He had a scraggly beard, maybe 2 or 3 months of growth. His hair was long but not matted. He looked like someone who'd been in the woods for a while, and I remember thinking this very clearly, he did not look like someone who'd been in the woods for 8 years. I introduced myself, told him who I was, that we were search and rescue, that people had reported someone who might need assistance. He looked at me and said, "I don't need assistance. I'm walking out." His voice was calm, not affect flat in the way I associate with severe psychological distress, more like someone who has already processed whatever they went through and arrived at a decision about how to speak about it. That's the best way I can describe it. Marcus asked if he was injured. He said no. Marcus asked if he was hungry. He paused for a second, then said, "I could eat," which struck me as oddly casual for the situation. I asked his name. He said Darren Velick. I didn't recognize it immediately. I'd never worked his case. But Marcus froze. Marcus has been with the unit since 2008 and had been on the original search. He told me later that the name hit him like a physical weight. We sat with him for about 20 minutes. Marcus did a basic assessment. Pupils responsive, no apparent hypothermia, no visible wounds, no signs of acute malnourishment beyond general thinness. His hands were calloused but clean. His fingernails were trimmed. I remember that detail because it didn't fit the picture of someone living rough in the wilderness for any extended period. You can't trim your nails neatly without tools, and tools imply infrastructure. We asked him if he wanted a ride to town. He said yes. We asked if he wanted us to contact anyone, family, friends. He said, "Not yet." We walked him out to the trailhead. He didn't limp. He walked steadily, maybe a little slowly, but with no difficulty. At the truck, he climbed in the back seat without hesitation, buckled his seatbelt, and stared out the window. I radioed dispatch to let them know we had a walkout subject, no medical emergency, and that we were transporting to town. I did not yet tell dispatch who he was. I'm not sure why. Something about the situation made me cautious, protective of information until I understood more. On the drive down, I asked him one question. I said, "Darren, do you know how long you've been gone?" He said, "Yes." I waited. He didn't elaborate. So I asked, "Where were you?" He turned from the window and looked directly at me in the rearview mirror. His expression was not hostile. It was not evasive. It was something closer to considered. Like he was deciding whether I was ready for an answer. Then he said, "I won't be explaining that." Not "I can't," not "I don't know." He said, "I won't be explaining that." Present tense, definitive. A decision he'd already made before we found him. We drove him to the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. By then, Marcus had quietly confirmed through dispatch that Darren Velick was listed as a missing/presumed dead person, case number and all. 2 deputies met us. They took him inside. I gave my statement and Marcus gave his. Then we were politely told that the situation was now a law enforcement matter and we'd be contacted if they needed anything further. I should have walked away at that point. That's what you do in SAR. You find people, you bring them back, you hand them off. What happened before or what happens after, isn't your responsibility. I know this. I've handed off dozens of subjects over the years, some of them in terrible condition, some of them clearly running from something, some of them confused about basic facts of their own situation. You hand them off and you go home. I didn't go home. I went home physically. But I did not stop thinking about Darren Velick. And I need to explain why. Because it wasn't just curiosity. It was something about the condition he was in. It didn't match any outcome I could construct. Let me lay it out the way I laid it out for myself that night. A man disappears in 2011. Extensive search finds no trace. 8 years pass. He reappears within a quarter mile of the same trailhead, walking out on his own, with no injuries, no severe malnutrition, trimmed fingernails, patched clothing, and a calm demeanor. He knows how long he's been gone. He declines to explain. There are a limited number of explanations. He survived in the wilderness alone for 8 years. Possible, technically, but the Gallatin Range in winter drops to 30 below. You'd need serious infrastructure, a structure, stored food, fire capability. Someone would have seen smoke. A hunter, a skier, a Forest Service crew. 8 winters with no sighting, no tracks, no smoke, no sign. Second possibility, he left the area entirely. Walked out, lived somewhere else, a town, a shelter, another state, and came back. That's the rational explanation. But then why was he wearing patched wilderness clothing? Why was he thin? Why did he walk in from the trail, not drive in? And why would a man who voluntarily disappeared for 8 years walk back to the exact trailhead where his truck had been found? Third possibility, someone was keeping him, against his will. But his demeanor didn't suggest captivity. There was no fearfulness, no hypervigilance, no deference to authority that you see in people who've been controlled. He was composed. He made a decision not to speak and held to it without apparent anxiety. None of the explanations fit. And that's what kept me awake. The next 3 weeks, I gathered what information I could through legitimate channels. I want to be clear about that. I didn't break into anyone's office or access restricted systems. But in a small county, information moves. SAR volunteers talk to deputies. Deputies talk to dispatchers. And I'd been around long enough that people talked to me. Here's what I learned in those 3 weeks. Darren was interviewed twice by detectives. Both interviews lasted less than an hour. In both, according to a deputy who was present for part of the second one, Darren was cooperative on every topic except where he'd been. He confirmed his identity. He provided his social security number, his mother's maiden name, details about his childhood in Billings that were verified. He confirmed that he'd gone camping in August 2011 and that he'd left his campsite on a day hike and had not returned to it. He confirmed that he was aware a search had been conducted. When asked where he'd been for the intervening 8 years, he said, and this is a near direct quote relayed to me, "I have nothing to report about that period." Not, "I don't remember." Not, "I was taken." Not, "I was in another state." He said he had nothing to report, as if he'd assessed the information, determined it was not transferable, and closed the subject. The detectives, from what I was told, found this frustrating but not actionable. He hadn't committed a crime by disappearing. He wasn't a fugitive. He wasn't a minor. He was a 39-year-old man who had returned voluntarily, and there was no legal mechanism to compel him to explain his absence. His family was contacted. His mother drove down from Billings. I don't know the details of that reunion, but I know from the deputy that Darren was released to her, and that they drove back to Billings together. A welfare check was conducted 10 days later, standard procedure, and he was described as settled, cooperative, and in adequate physical condition. That should have been the end of it. About 2 weeks after Darren left for Billings, I was doing routine admin at the SAR cache, our equipment storage facility near Four Corners. I was auditing GPS units, which we do quarterly, downloading track logs to check battery performance and clear memory. It's mind-numbing work. You plug in the unit, download the tracks, verify dates, and archive them. I was working through a unit, GPS 09, that had been assigned to a training exercise in June. When I downloaded the tracks, there were more logged than there should have been. The training exercise accounted for 2 days of tracking. But there was a third track on the unit, dated July 14th, 5 days after we'd found Darren. I opened it up on the mapping software. The track showed a path beginning at the Hyalite Creek trailhead and extending approximately 4 miles up the drainage, then turning south off trail into the steep terrain above Site 7. The track climbed nearly 2,000 vertical feet, then terminated at a point in the upper basin, just below the ridge crest, in what would be heavy talus and a scattered subalpine fir. The total distance was about 6 miles. The track ended abruptly, not a battery death. Those show a gradual signal decay in the log. This was a clean termination. Someone turned the unit off at that point. I checked the assignment log. GPS 09 was not signed out on July 14th. It should have been in the cache, on the charger, between uses. Someone had taken it, used it, and returned it without logging it. I'm going to be honest with you. My first thought was Marcus. He'd been on the original search in 2011. He'd recognized Darren's name immediately. And Marcus is the kind of person who would go back to the terrain on his own to look for answers, to look for whatever Darren had left behind, or whatever Darren had walked out of. I called Marcus that evening. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just asked, casually, if he'd been up Hyalite recently. He said he hadn't. He said he'd been working overtime at his regular job. He's a contractor, and hadn't been on trail since our training day in June. I believed him. Marcus isn't a good liar, and his voice was easy, no deflection. So someone else from the unit had taken that GPS and hiked that track, or someone outside the unit had accessed the cache. The cache has a combination lock, and the combination is known to about 15 active volunteers and 3 sheriff's office personnel. I mapped the termination point. I studied it on satellite imagery. There was nothing visible. No structure, no clearing, no trail. Just talus, Krumholtz, and the rocky spine of the ridge. I printed the coordinates and put them in my jacket pocket. I told myself I was noting them for documentation purposes. I was not noting them for documentation purposes. On August 3rd, I drove up to the Hyalite Creek trailhead at 6 in the morning. I told my wife I was going for a conditioning hike, which was technically true. I parked, shouldered my pack, 35 liters with water, first aid, layers, GPS, radio, and food, and started up the trail. I want to describe the hike because the details matter. The first 4 miles were standard. Maintained trail, moderate grade, creek noise to the west. I passed Site 7 at mile 3. The campsite was empty, obviously. It had been 8 years since anyone had found Darren's tent there. But I paused anyway. The bear box was still there. The log where the tent had been staked was rotting into the soil. Trees had filled in around the edges. Time had made the site ordinary again. Past Site 7, I continued on the main trail to the point where the GPS track had departed. There was no junction, no sign, no boot path. Just the spot where the main trail curved east and the track log had gone straight south, uphill. I left the trail. The terrain climbed immediately. Deadfall, then steep lodgepole, then the trees thinning as I gained elevation, I was navigating by GPS now, following the track I'd downloaded to my personal unit. The grade was punishing, consistently 30 to 40%. My calves burned. I stopped twice to drink water and check my bearings. At about 9,000 feet, the trees gave way to talus, a vast field of gray and rust-colored rock stretching upward toward the ridge. The GPS track continued straight through it. I followed. I reached the termination point at 10:47 a.m. I know because I checked my watch and wrote it in my field notebook. Force of habit. There was nothing there. I mean that literally. There was no structure, no camp, no cache, no gear, no cairn, no marking of any kind. There was talus in every direction. The ridge crest was about 200 feet above me. Below, the boulder field fell away steeply into the timber. The wind was steady from the southwest. I could see across the drainage to the peaks on the far side. I stood at the exact coordinates where the GPS track had ended. I turned in a slow circle. Nothing. I expanded my search in concentric rings, 20 feet out, then 50. Nothing. No disturbed rocks, no scuff marks, no fabric, no trash, no sign that any human being had ever stood on this exact spot. But I noticed something. I almost didn't notice it. And then I couldn't stop noticing it. The rocks at the termination point were dry, uniformly dry. This shouldn't have been remarkable except that it had rained the night before. I'd checked the weather before driving up and remembered light showers moving through the area after midnight. The rocks, 50 feet in every direction, had a slight darkening on their surfaces. The residual moisture you'd expect on a summer morning after overnight rain. But in a rough circle, maybe 30 feet across, centered on the coordinates, the rocks were completely dry, as if they'd been covered, or as if the rain simply hadn't reached them. I knelt and touched the surface of one. It wasn't warm. It wasn't unusual in any tactile way, just dry. I spent another 20 minutes at the site. I photographed the dry patch, though in the photos it's extremely difficult to see the contrast. The difference in rock coloration is subtle, and my phone camera struggled with it. I took GPS readings to confirm I was at the right coordinates. I was. I wrote everything down. Then I hiked out. The return trip was faster. Downhill, familiar ground. I was back at my truck by 2 in the afternoon. I sat in the cab for a while before driving home. I was trying to assemble what I had into something that made sense. A missing man returns after 8 years and refuses to explain. An unauthorized GPS track leads to an empty ridgetop above his original campsite. The ridgetop has an anomalous dry patch after rainfall. None of these things individually are inexplicable. Together, they suggested something without stating it. 3 days after my hike, I received an email. It came to my personal account, not my SAR address. The sender was a Gmail account I didn't recognize, just a string of numbers. The subject line was empty. The body of the email contained one sentence. You were at the site on August 3rd. No signature, no context, no threat. Just that statement. I felt cold when I read it. Not because the content was threatening. It wasn't. But because it meant someone knew. Someone had either seen me on that ridge, which was unlikely given the remoteness and the fact that I'd seen no one all day, or someone had tracked my movement. My personal GPS unit was just that. Personal. It wasn't connected to any network. The only way someone could know I'd been there was if they'd watched me go up, watched me come down, or had their own monitoring on that location. I did not respond to the email. 4 days later, I received another one. Same account, same empty subject line. This one said, "He was not the first to come back." I need to pause here and tell you where my head was at that point, because I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like the setup of a story that ends with a conspiracy or a monster or some revelation that ties everything together. I want to be clear. I never received a tidy explanation. What I received was more information that made the picture larger without making it clearer. After the second email, I made a decision that I'm still not sure was wise. I responded. I typed a single question. Who else came back? The response came within 2 hours. It said, "Ask the family about 1987. That's all it said. I sent 2 more messages to that account over the following week. Neither was answered. The account still exists, as far as I know. I've never received a bounce notification. But it has never sent me another message. I spent a full evening trying to figure out what happened in 1987 that connected to the Hyalite drainage or to the Velick family. I searched newspaper archives. I searched the SAR unit's historical call-out records, which go back to 1979 in binder form in the cache. I searched Montana missing persons databases. Here's what I found. In September 1987, a 17-year-old named Brian Velick was reported missing after failing to return from a fishing trip in the Hyalite drainage. He'd gone in alone, a day trip, no overnight gear. He was Darren Velick's uncle, Darren's father's younger brother. The search in 1987 was smaller, different era, fewer resources. Ground teams only, 4 days. They found his fishing rod and tackle box along the creek about 3 miles from the trailhead. No other trace. The case went cold. Brian Velick was never found. He was declared dead in 1994. Darren Velick went missing in 2011 in the same drainage where his uncle had vanished 24 years earlier. And now someone was telling me Darren was not the first to come back. The implication was staggering. And I need you to understand that I have not been able to confirm it. I have found no record of Brian Velick returning. His death certificate stands. His missing persons case is officially closed. But the email said he was not the first to come back. If that was true, and if it referred to Brian, then either his return was never documented, or it was documented and removed from the record. Or the email wasn't referring to Brian at all. I did something I'm not particularly proud of. In mid-August, I drove to Billings. I told my wife it was for a training seminar, which there genuinely was, though I skipped most of it. I drove to the address listed for Darren's mother, Patricia Velick, which I'd found through standard public records. I sat in my truck outside her house for about 15 minutes before I went to the door. It was a modest ranch home in a neighborhood near the Rims. Well-maintained, flowers in the front bed, American flag on a pole by the garage. I knocked. Patricia answered. She was in her late 60s, small, sharp-eyed. I introduced myself. I told her I was with Gallatin County SAR, and that I'd been one of the people who found Darren in July. Her expression shifted immediately, not unfriendly, but guarded. She said, "He told me someone might come." That stopped me. I asked what she meant. She said, "Darren told me that someone from the search group would eventually come to the house because they wouldn't be satisfied. He said to answer the door, but not to invite you in." She paused. "So I'm answering the door." We talked on her front step for maybe 10 minutes. I asked how Darren was doing. She said he was fine, healthy, sleeping well, eating. He'd put on weight. He was reading a lot. She said it like she was describing someone recovering from surgery, clinical, careful, optimistic. I asked her, gently I thought, whether she'd asked Darren where he'd been. She said, "Of course I asked." I waited. He told me not to worry about him and that where he'd been wasn't a place that exists for other people. She delivered this in a flat tone, like she was quoting precisely. He said it wouldn't do me any good to know, and that he came back because the time was right. I asked her what she thought he meant. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something that I've thought about nearly every day since. She said, "My brother-in-law said the same thing, almost word for word, in 1989. I felt the ground shift under me. I said, "Brian came back?" She nodded. For about 6 weeks. Then he went away again. Not to the same place as far as I know. Just away. Down to Arizona. We lost contact. Did he explain where he'd been? The 2 years he was missing? He said the same thing Darren said. That it wasn't a place for other people. That he came back because the time was right. She folded her arms. He was different when he came back. Calm. Like Darren is now. Like they've both been somewhere very still. I asked if Brian was still alive. "I don't know," she said. "We haven't heard from him since 1991. I asked one more question. I asked if she knew about the spot, the ridge above Site 7, the upper basin. She shook her head. Then she said, "But Darren's been going up there since he was a teenager. He told me once it was the most important place he'd ever been." She paused. "He said that before he disappeared, years before." I drove back to Bozeman that evening. The training seminar was still going the next day, but I didn't attend. I went home and sat at my kitchen table with my field notebook and tried to draw connections. 2 members of the same family. Both disappeared in the hyalite drainage. Both returned, one after 2 years, one after 8. Both refused to explain in nearly identical language. Both described where they'd been as not a place that exists for other people. Both returned calm, healthy, and apparently undamaged. And someone, the anonymous emailer, knew about both cases. Knew I'd been to the site. Knew enough to direct me to 1987. I want to tell you about one more thing that happened before I explain where this left me. In late August, maybe 10 days after my trip to Billings, I went back to the SAR cache to check on something. I wanted to look at GPS-09 again. I'd been thinking about that unauthorized track. Who had taken the unit? Who had hiked to those coordinates 5 days after we found Darren? I hadn't raised it with anyone in the unit because I wasn't sure how to frame the question without revealing my own unauthorized interest in the case. When I pulled GPS-09 off the charger and connected it to the laptop, the track was gone. I don't mean it had been archived. I mean it had been deleted. The unit's memory showed the June training exercise and nothing else. The July 14th track, the one I downloaded weeks earlier, the one I'd followed up that ridge, had been removed from the device. I still had my copy. I'd saved it to a personal thumb drive the day I first downloaded it. But someone had gone into the cache, accessed the unit, and deliberately erased the track. Which meant someone knew it was there. Which meant the person who'd made the track in the first place had come back to clean up after themselves. Or someone else had done it for them. I checked the cache log. The combination lock log sheet showed no entries between my August audit date and the current date. If someone had come in, they hadn't signed the sheet. That's a violation of unit protocol. But it's not one that gets enforced. Half the time people forget to sign in. It's a clipboard hanging on a nail inside the door. I put the GPS back on the charger. I sat in the cache for a while, surrounded by ropes and helmets and litter baskets and the accumulated gear of organized rescue. and I felt for the first time that I was involved in something that our unit's procedures could not accommodate. SAR is built for finding people. It is built for the question, where are they? It is not built for the question, where were they and why won't they say? September came. The days were getting shorter and the aspens were starting to turn in the higher elevations. I was still working call-outs. We had a busy late season that year, a couple of overdue hunters and a lost child near Leverage Canyon who turned up safe within hours. Normal work. I was functional. But underneath every call-out, every GPS track I reviewed, every map I spread across the hood of my truck, there was a secondary calculation running, a parallel awareness. I'd look at terrain and think, what else is up there that comes back? On September 11th, I remember the date because of the obvious association. I was at home in the evening when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Billings number I didn't recognize. I answered. It was Darren Velick. His voice was exactly as I remembered it from July. Calm, unhurried. He said, "This is Darren. You came to my mother's house." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. I confirmed. I told him I'd wanted to check on him, which was partially true. He said, "I know you went up to the site." I didn't respond immediately. My mind was racing. How did he know? Was he the emailer? Was he connected to whoever had taken the GPS unit? He seemed to read my silence. He said, "I'm not angry, but I want to talk to you. Once. And then I'd like you to stop looking." I agreed. I'm not sure what else I could have said. He asked if I could drive to Billings that weekend. I said I could. He gave me an address, not his mother's house, a coffee shop on Grand Avenue. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. I drove up Saturday. The coffee shop was one of those converted house places with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Darren was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back corner with a mug of something. He looked better than he had in July. He'd filled out. His beard was trimmed short. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans and could have been any guy in any Montana coffee shop on any Saturday morning. I got a coffee and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he said, "Ask your questions. I'll answer what I can." I want to reproduce this conversation as accurately as possible. I wrote it down in my truck immediately afterward, while it was fresh. What follows is not word for word. I'm not a court reporter. But it's close. I asked him the obvious question first. "Where were you for 8 years?" He looked at his coffee. Then he said, "I was in the basin, the upper basin. I never left it." I said, "That's not possible. Hundreds of people have been through that drainage. Search teams swept that terrain." "I know," he said. "I saw them, some of them." "You saw the search teams?" "Not in 2011. Later. Hikers, hunters. I saw people come through. They didn't see me." I asked how that was possible. He took a long drink of his coffee. Then he said, and I'm being as precise as I can here, "The site isn't always accessible from the outside. And when it is accessible, the people inside it aren't visible from the outside. It's not that I was hidden. It's that I was offset, present but at a different remove." I told him that didn't make sense. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not explaining it publicly. Because anything I say either sounds like mental illness or like a lie. It's neither. But I can't demonstrate it, and I can't prove it. And saying it to someone who hasn't experienced it just makes me sound damaged." I asked him what the site was, what was up there. "It's a place," he said. "I don't know who made it or how old it is. I don't think anyone made it. I think it just exists. the way a hot spring exists. It's a feature, a natural feature that happens to be incompatible with how we understand the landscape. A natural feature that makes people invisible for 8 years. That makes people elsewhere for 8 years. Not invisible, elsewhere. The duration feels different from inside. It didn't feel like 8 years to me. I asked how long it felt. He paused longer this time. Maybe 4 months, 5 at the outside. I sat with that. I didn't know what to do with it. A man sitting across from me in a coffee shop telling me, without apparent distress or delusion, that he spent what felt like 5 months in a place that exists in the same physical coordinates as a talus field in the Gallatin Range, but is not perceptible from the outside. He wasn't selling anything. He wasn't writing a book. He wasn't starting a religion. He was just stating it. I asked why he came back. Because it lets you, at intervals. The intervals aren't predictable, but when one arrives, you feel it. Like a door opening that you didn't know was closed. You either walk through it or you stay. I walked through. Your uncle didn't stay. Darren looked at me sharply, the first time his composure shifted. My mother told you about Brian. Yes. He set down his mug carefully. Brian went first. When I was a kid, he told me about it. Not in detail, more like a promise. He said there was a place up there that was waiting, and that our family could reach it. He said he'd been inside for what felt like a few weeks, and came back. And 2 years had gone by. He said it was the calmest he'd ever felt. And you went looking for it. I didn't have to look. I knew exactly where it was. Brian showed me when I was 16. Took me up there and stood at the exact spot. Nothing happened. It wasn't open. But he said I'd know when it was, and I did. In 2011, I was at my campsite and I felt it, like a pressure change. So I hiked up. He shrugged. I meant to go for a day. That was 23 years ago by outside count. I said, "You mean 8 years?" No. Brian went in for 2 years in 1987. He came back in 1989. Then he went back in. My mother lost contact with him in 1991. I think he went back in permanently that time. From inside, it might have been a week between his return and his final departure. So when I entered in 2011, Brian might still have been there. I don't know. The place isn't... He stopped, seemed to choose his words very carefully. It's not a room. You don't encounter other people in it the way you'd encounter them in a room. It's more like you're each in your own version of the same space. I never saw Brian, but I felt like I wasn't alone. I asked him about the dry patch, the rocks that didn't get wet when it rained. He smiled for the first time, a small, private smile. You noticed that? I did. That's the boundary, the threshold. When it's closed, you can't perceive it except by absence. No rain falls there. Snow doesn't accumulate. Leaves don't drift onto it in the fall. It's a gap in the surface of the world. From the outside, it just looks like dry rock. From the inside. He shook his head. I can't describe the inside. I've tried, in my own journal. The words don't correspond to anything. I asked him who sent me the emails. His expression changed again, not surprise, but something like resignation. I don't know for certain, but I think there are other families, other drainages, other sites. And some of the people who've come back have found each other, not formally, not an organization, just people who recognize the experience in each other. One of them might have noticed you looking. Why would they contact me? Maybe to see what you'd do, maybe to warn you, maybe both. I asked the question that had been forming since I first read those emails. Is the site dangerous? He considered this for a long time, long enough that my coffee went cold. No, he finally said. Not in any way I can articulate as danger. I was not harmed. I was not held against my will. I could have left earlier if a threshold had opened earlier. The place itself is... He paused again. It's neutral. It doesn't want anything. It doesn't do anything to you. You're just somewhere else for a while. And then you come back, and the world has moved on without you. That sounds like danger to me. I know. That's why I'm not telling anyone else where it is. That's why I'm asking you to stop looking. He leaned forward slightly. You went up there. You stood on the boundary. It was closed. If it had been open, if the timing had been different by a day or an hour, you might not have come back down. Not for years. Do you understand? I understood. Your wife would have gotten a phone call from dispatch. Your unit would have searched for you. They would have swept right over you and never found anything. We talked for another 20 minutes or so. Smaller questions. I asked if he was going back. He said he didn't know. He said the pull was there. Faint, like a memory of a sound. But that he'd decided to stay on the outside for now, for his mother's sake. He said the hardest part of being back wasn't adjusting to how the world had changed. It was the time differential. People he'd known had aged 8 years. Relationships had moved on. A friend had died. The world had continued without him, and he had to grieve that gap. I asked about the practical things, how he'd survived inside. Did he eat, sleep, age? He said, I aged. I can feel it. But slower, I think. Inside, there was... He stopped himself. Then, I'm not going to describe the interior. I'm sorry. Not because I don't trust you, because I don't trust what the description would do. To you, or to anyone who heard it. The wanting is the danger, not the place. I asked one final question. I asked if anyone had ever gone in and not come back. He said, I think so. I think some people choose to stay. Brian might have. I don't know what choosing to stay permanently means in practical terms. Whether you die in there eventually or whether the time continues to stretch, I don't know. Then he stood up. He put his hand out, and I shook it. His grip was firm, dry, normal. He said, please stop looking. Not for your sake or mine, for your family's sake. You stood on it, and nothing happened. Consider yourself fortunate and walk away. I said I would. He left. I sat in that coffee shop for another half hour, writing everything down. Then I drove home. That was September 2019. It's been several years now. I kept my word mostly. I have not gone back to the upper basin. I have not attempted to contact Darren again. I have not received any further emails from the anonymous account. But I need to tell you 3 more things, because they're the reason I'm recording this at all. First, in November 2019, I pulled the unit's historical call-out records from the early 1990s. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I told myself I was just organizing the archive, which was true. We'd been meaning to digitize those binders for years. In the 1992 records, I found a call-out summary for the Hyalite drainage. A day hiker reported seeing a man standing motionless in the upper talus field above the creek, in an area with no trail. The hiker reported it because the man appeared to be wearing no jacket despite near-freezing temperatures and did not respond to shouted hails. A team was dispatched the following morning. They found no one. The call-out was classified as unconfirmed sighting, no subject located. The coordinates of the sighting were within 200 meters of my termination point. Second, in early 2020, before everything shut down, I was at a regional SAR conference in Helena, During a break, I was talking with a team leader from Flathead County. Casual conversation, trading call-out stories the way you do. He mentioned, offhand, that his unit had a recurring headache with a specific drainage on the west side of the Swan Range. He said they'd had 4 separate missing person call-outs to the same 2-mile stretch over 15 years, and that 2 of the subjects had walked out on their own after being missing for periods that didn't match their condition. His words. I asked what he meant. He said one of them was missing for 3 weeks in December and came back with no frostbite, no weight loss, and mild sunburn. In December, in the Swan Range. I asked if the subject had explained. He laughed and said, "Guy wouldn't say a word about it. Not to us, not to the sheriff, not to his own wife. Just said he was fine and asked us to leave him alone." I didn't tell him about Darren. I wanted to. I almost did. But something stopped me. Maybe Darren's request, maybe self-preservation, maybe the sense that speaking it out loud to another professional would turn it into something I'd have to keep defending for the rest of my career. Third, and this is the one that keeps me up at night, last spring, and I'm being deliberately vague about the exact date. I was driving past the Highlight Creek trailhead on my way to a meeting. I wasn't planning to stop. I didn't stop. But as I drove past the pullout, I saw a vehicle there. A gray Tacoma, an old one, 2004 or 2005 model year. Montana plates. I kept driving. My hands were tight on the wheel. I told myself it was a coincidence. Gray Tacomas are common in Montana. It didn't have to be his. But when I drove back past the trailhead 2 hours later, the truck was gone. I don't know what's up there. I don't know how it works, or how old it is, or how many families know about it, or how many drainages have their own version of whatever that dry patch of rock actually represents. I don't know if Darren Vellick is telling the truth, or if he experienced something that his mind has translated into a narrative that makes sense to him, but doesn't correspond to physical reality. I don't know if his uncle is alive or dead. I don't know who sent me those emails. What I know is this. A man vanished for 8 years and returned healthy, calm, and unwilling to explain. His uncle vanished for 2 years in the same place a generation earlier and exhibited the same behavior upon return. The physical location shows a measurable anomaly. Rocks that refuse precipitation within a defined radius. Someone with knowledge of both disappearances knew I'd visited the site and directed me toward historical context I hadn't yet found. And a team leader in another county, 200 miles away, described a nearly identical pattern with identical subject behavior. The drainage is still open. People hike it every summer. They camp at Site 7. They day hike to the upper basin. They walk across that patch of dry rock and never notice it, because why would you? Dry rocks in a talus field. That's all it looks like. That's all it is, unless it isn't. Unless the timing is different. Unless you happen to stand there on a day when it's open. And then you're somewhere else for 8 years, while the world moves on without you. Darren told me the wanting is the danger. He's right. I think about it every day, not with fear. That's what I can't explain to my wife, to anyone. Not with fear, with something worse, with longing. I stood on it, and nothing happened. Some part of me wishes something had. That's why I'm telling this story. Not as a warning about the place, as a warning about what the knowledge does. You can know about something like this, and walk away and resume your normal life, and still feel, every single day, that the most important door you ever stood in front of was closed when you got there. And you'll never know if it's open now, right now, while you're sitting here listening to this. I haven't gone back. I want you to know that. I haven't gone back. But the trailhead is 26 minutes from my house. And some mornings, when I'm driving to work. I take the long way, just to pass it, just to see if there's a gray truck in the lot. There never is. The story's final line was, "Except that one time." That is where the narrative concluded. However, you're asking me to continue from that exact line and write part 3 at 4,500 to 5,500 words to extend and deepen the ending. I'll continue seamlessly from that point. Except that one time. I told myself it didn't mean anything. A gray Tacoma in a trailhead parking lot in Montana is like a blue Subaru in Colorado. You'll see 10 of them on any given Saturday. I told myself this, and I believed it for about 3 days. Then I stopped believing it and started checking. Not obsessively. I want to be clear about that. I didn't start stalking the trailhead. But my commute has 2 routes, the direct way through 4 corners and the longer way that takes me past the Hyalite turnoff. The longer way adds 11 minutes. That's nothing. That's 1 extra podcast segment. That's half a coffee. So I started taking the longer way maybe 3 mornings a week, just glancing at the pullout as I drove past, noting what was parked there, telling myself it was idle curiosity, the way you check a weather app for a city you used to live in. For months, there was nothing unusual. The lot held the vehicles you'd expect: Subarus with bike racks, trucks with dog kennels in the bed, rental sedans from tourists who'd read about the reservoir trail online. Normal traffic, normal patterns. I was relieved. I was also, if I'm honest, disappointed. And the disappointment disturbed me more than anything else in this entire account. Then in late summer, I'm going to say August, though I'm not marking exact dates anymore for reasons that will become clear, I noticed something that didn't register as significant for almost 2 weeks. There was a vehicle at the trailhead that I saw on a Tuesday morning at 7:15. A white Jeep Cherokee, older model, maybe mid-90s. I noticed it because it had a cracked windshield and a faded bumper sticker I couldn't read at speed. That's all. I drove past, went to work, forgot about it. I saw the same Jeep 3 days later. Same spot in the lot. Not approximately the same spot. The same spot. Far corner. Backed in against the tree line. Friday morning, 7:20. I noticed it because of the cracked windshield. The following Tuesday, it was there again. Same spot. 7:15. Friday. Same spot. 7:18. I started watching for it specifically. Over the next 3 weeks, that white Jeep Cherokee was in the Hyalite Creek trailhead lot every Tuesday and Friday morning when I drove past. Always in the far corner, always backed in. I never saw it on any other day, though I'll admit I wasn't checking every day. I ran the plate. I have a friend, I'm not going to name him or describe his role, who can run Montana plates without it generating a formal inquiry. The vehicle was registered to a woman in Helena. The name meant nothing to me. I wrote it down and put it in my notebook. Then I did something I'd told Darren I wouldn't do. I want to acknowledge that clearly. He asked me to stop looking. I said I would. And for almost a year, I did. But the Jeep broke something open. Because if Darren was the only person involved, if this was a singular family phenomenon, then the trailhead should have gone quiet after his return. No one should be going up there on a schedule. No one should be visiting that drainage with the regularity of a commuter unless they had a reason to be near that site on a recurring basis. On a Friday morning in early September, I didn't drive past the trailhead. I pulled into it. I parked at the opposite end of the lot from the white Jeep, and I waited. I waited for 4 hours. I brought a thermos and my field notebook, and I sat in my truck with the windows cracked, and I watched the trail emerge from the trees at the lot's edge. Hikers came and went. a pair of women with trekking poles, a guy with a dog, a family with small children who turned around after probably a quarter mile based on timing. None of them went to the Jeep. At 11:40, a woman emerged from the trailhead. She was maybe 50, fit, wearing trail runners and lightweight hiking pants and a long-sleeve sun shirt. Her hair was pulled back under a buff. She carried a small day pack, 20 liters at most. She walked directly to the Jeep, opened the back, placed her pack inside, and sat on the tailgate for a moment, drinking from a water bottle. She didn't look tired. She didn't look like she'd been hiking for 4+ hours. She looked like she'd taken a casual stroll. But here's what caught my attention. Her boots were clean, not trail dusty, not creek splashed. Clean. The same way Darren's hands had been clean when we found him. An impossible cleanliness for someone who'd just come out of that drainage. I made a decision in about 3 seconds. I got out of my truck and walked toward her. Not aggressively, just a guy crossing a parking lot. She saw me coming when I was about 30 feet away, and her body language changed immediately. Not fear, recognition. Not of me specifically, of what I represented. She knew I'd been watching. Her chin came up and her shoulders set. And she looked at me the way a dog looks at another dog that's entered its yard. Assessing. I said, "Good morning. Good hike?" She said, "Yes, thanks." Polite, terminal, the kind of response designed to end a conversation. I said, and I don't know why I said it this way, except that something told me indirectness would get me nowhere. "I know about the upper basin." She stopped drinking, lowered the water bottle, looked at me for a long 5 seconds. Then she said, "Who are you?" I told her my name. I told her I was with Gallatin County SAR. I told her I'd been one of the people who found Darren Bellick. Something in her face shifted. The guardedness didn't leave, but something joined it. Curiosity, maybe, or concern. She said, "You're the one who went up there." "How do you know that?" "Darren told me someone from the search unit had been to the boundary. He didn't give me your name." She paused. "He also said you agreed to stop looking." I did agree to that. And yet, here you are. I didn't have a good response to that, so I asked her directly, "Are you going to the site twice a week?" She closed the back of the Jeep, leaned against it with her arms folded, studied me the way Patricia had studied me on her front porch, deciding how much to share with someone who was already in too deep to be ignored, but not deep enough to be trusted. "I'm monitoring it," she said. "Monitoring it how?" "I check whether it's open or closed. That's all. I hike up, I observe the boundary, and I hike back down." "How can you tell if it's open?" "You know the dry patch?" I nodded. "When it's closed, the patch is there. Dry rock, maybe 30 feet across. Nothing changes. When it's approaching open, the patch gets smaller. The edges start accepting moisture. Rain hits them. Snow sticks. The dry area contracts toward the center." She spoke about this the way I'd speak about reading a topographic map, purely technical. When it's fully open, there is no dry patch. The entire area looks normal, indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. That's when you could walk across it and go somewhere else. Has it been open since Darren came back? No. It's been stable at about 30 feet since his return. I've been checking for 11 months, and the boundary hasn't moved. "How do you know about this? Are you?" I wasn't sure how to ask. "Are you connected to the Bellick family?" "No." She pushed off the tailgate. "I'm connected to a different family, a different site. Mine is in the Bitterroots. I've been aware of these places for most of my adult life." "How many are there?" She looked at me for a long time, Then she said, "More than you want to know about." I asked if she'd ever been inside. "No," she said. And then, more quietly, "My daughter has." The weight of that sentence landed on me physically. I felt it in my chest. This woman, controlled, precise, clearly intelligent, was telling me that her daughter had entered one of these places. I didn't ask the obvious follow-up. I couldn't. Not yet. She said it for me. "She's been gone for 6 years. The boundary at our site has been contracting slowly. I believe she'll come back." I checked the Hyalite site because it's the one I can reach most easily from Helena, and because it gives me a comparison. If this one opens, it might indicate something about the cycle that affects ours. A cycle. They seem to operate on rhythms, not predictable ones, not like tides, more like weather patterns, complex, influenced by factors I can't identify. But there are correlations between sites. When one opens, others sometimes follow within weeks or months. I asked her how she'd learned all this, whether there was a community, a network. "Loose," she said. "Very loose. A few dozen people, maybe. Mostly family members of people who've gone in, a few who've come back themselves. We don't meet. We don't have a website. Some of us email. Some of us share observations. Some of us just watch." "Who sent me the emails last year about Darren in 1987? She shrugged. "I don't know. Could have been anyone who noticed your GPS track on the site. We do watch the sites, not with cameras. That doesn't work, as you might have noticed if you've ever tried to photograph the boundary clearly. But people notice when someone new shows interest." I asked her name. She hesitated. Then she said, "Corinne." No last name offered, and I didn't press. I asked her one more question, the one that had been eating at me since the coffee shop with Darren. "Is there any way to get someone out? If someone's inside, can you reach them?" Her face did something complicated. Not a collapse. She was too composed for that. But a tightening around the eyes that told me this question had weight she carried every day. "No," she said. "You wait. That's all. You watch the boundary and you wait for it to open, and you hope they choose to walk back through." She paused. "And if they don't, if the opening comes and closes and they're still inside, you wait for the next one." "How long between openings?" At the Hyalite site, based on what I can reconstruct from the Velic family history, the interval has ranged from 2 to 23 years. 23 years. I thought of Brian Velic. I thought of this woman's daughter. I thought of the SAR team leader in Flathead County describing a man who came back from 3 weeks in December with a sunburn. I thought of every missing person case I'd ever worked that ended in "no subject located," and wondered how many of those weren't falls, weren't drownings, weren't animal predation, but were simply people who stepped onto a patch of dry rock on the wrong day. Or the right day, depending on how you look at it. Corinne left that morning. She said, "I'd prefer if you didn't come back to the lot on my days. It attracts attention." I told her I wouldn't. I asked if I could contact her, if she'd share an email address in case I learned anything relevant. She thought about it for a moment, then gave me a Proton Mail address. She said, "Don't write unless it matters." I haven't written, not because nothing has mattered, but because I don't trust myself to know what matters anymore. My judgment on this entire subject is compromised, and I'm aware of it. I'm aware that I've become one of the people watching, not at a site. I don't go up there. I keep that promise. But watching the edges of the phenomenon from a distance. Reading missing persons reports differently. Listening to SAR colleagues' stories differently. Noticing things I wouldn't have noticed before 2019. There's a phrase in search and rescue: probability of detection. It refers to the likelihood that a search team passing through an area will actually detect a subject who's there. It's never 100%. Terrain, vegetation, weather, fatigue, all of these reduce POD. A team can sweep directly through a subject's location and miss them. It happens. It's documented. It's a statistical reality that we build into our search planning. But what if the POD for certain subjects isn't low because of terrain or vegetation? What if it's zero? What if there are people in these drainages, in these basins, on these ridges, who are physically present in some sense, but whose probability of detection is zero because they're not occupying the same version of the space that the searchers are occupying? What does that do to our numbers? What does that do to the cold cases, the ones that never resolve, the ones where the terrain has been searched 3 times and nothing is ever found? I can't think about that too long. It makes me feel unmoored in a way that affects my ability to do my work. And I still do the work. I still coordinate callouts. I still deploy teams. I still plot search grids on maps and calculate POD values and make decisions about where to send people. I do all of this knowing that for some of these cases, not all, probably not even many, but some, the entire framework might be irrelevant. The subject might be 10 feet from the search team and completely unreachable. I want to tell you one final thing. This happened recently enough that I'm not going to be specific about timing. I was at the SAR cache doing administrative work. Radios were on in the background. We keep the county frequency live during business hours. A call-out came through. Overdue hiker in the Hyalite drainage. Solo male, mid-20s, one-night permit at Site 7. Failed to meet his girlfriend at the trailhead that morning. 12 hours overdue. Everything in me went cold. I pulled up the details. Site 7. Solo male. One-night permit. The parallels to Darren's 2011 trip were close enough to feel deliberate, though I know that's irrational. Site 7 is a popular campsite. Solo permits are common. And people go overdue in that drainage every summer for perfectly ordinary reasons. I deployed the initial team. Standard protocols. 2 ground teams of 3, one starting from the trailhead and leapfrogging to Site 7, the other approaching from the upper drainage. I coordinated from the trailhead. I did my job. Team 1 reached Site 7 within 2 hours. His tent was there. Sleeping bag inside, cook kit on the bear box, one trekking pole leaning against the bear box, day pack missing. I stood at the trailhead holding my radio, and I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. I wanted to say something on the air, to tell the team leaders to search the upper basin, to look for the dry patch, to pay attention to whether the rocks were wet or dry. I wanted to tell them that if the boundary was open, they wouldn't find him, that no one would find him, that he might come back in 2 years, or 8 or 23, and he might be calm and healthy and unwilling to explain. I didn't say any of it. I ran standard protocols. I expanded the search grid. I requested a dog team for the following morning. I filed the daily summary with the sheriff's office. I went home. They found him the next day. He'd fallen on a talus scramble about a mile south of camp. Broken ankle, moderate hypothermia, but conscious and coherent. Dog team located him at 9 in the morning. He was airlifted to Bozeman Health. Standard outcome, standard rescue, ordinary. I was so relieved I sat in my truck and put my head on the steering wheel and didn't move for 5 minutes. But here's what I haven't told anyone. When the team called in his location, I pulled it up on the map. He was found at 8,200 feet on the south-facing talus slope, about 300 meters east of the dry patch coordinates. 300 meters. a 15-minute scramble if he'd gone left instead of right when he left the trail. He went right and broke his ankle. If he'd gone left, he might have walked across 30 feet of dry rock and vanished for a decade. Or he might have walked across 30 feet of dry rock and nothing would have happened because it wasn't open. I'll never know. He'll never know. He's probably back at work now, telling people about his helicopter rescue. No idea that the worst thing that could have happened to him wasn't the broken ankle. Or maybe the best thing. I don't know anymore. Darren didn't seem damaged. He seemed peaceful. Corinne's observations suggest her daughter might return healthy whenever the boundary next opens. Brian Velick told his teenage nephew it was the calmest he'd ever felt. None of the people who come back describe suffering. They describe something more like suspension, an absence of time's weight. And that's what scares me. Not that it might be terrible inside, that it might not be. I'm going to end here because I've said everything I can say. I have no resolution to offer. Darren Velick is alive in Billings, or was, as of the last I heard. His mother is alive. His uncle has been gone since 1991, and no one knows if that means dead or elsewhere. Corinne drives from Helena to the Hyalite trailhead twice a week to measure a circle of dry rock and calculate whether her daughter might be coming home. The anonymous emailer has never contacted me again. The SAR team leader in Flathead County probably doesn't know why I asked so many questions at that conference. The GPS track is gone from the unit. My copy is on a thumb drive in my desk drawer. And I take the long way to work 3 mornings a week. 11 extra minutes. I tell myself it's for the scenery. The road runs along the reservoir, and the water is beautiful in the early morning. And the mountains above it hold the light in a way that makes you understand why people move to Montana. But I always look at the lot. I always check. I'm not sure what I'll do if I see the gray Tacoma there again. Part of me wants to believe I'll keep driving, that I'll honor my promise to Darren, respect the boundary, both the physical one and the one he drew around the information. Part of me wants to believe I'm strong enough to know about something like this and let it remain unknown. But there's another part of me, and it's growing, not shrinking, with time, that thinks about what Corinne said, that the boundary contracts before it opens, that the dry patch gets smaller, that at some point the 30 feet becomes 20, becomes 10, becomes nothing. And then for some window of time, hours, days, who knows, the door is open and the rock looks like every other rock, and anyone who walks across it goes somewhere else. I think about what it would feel like to step across and have the weight of years lift. To be somewhere that Darren described as so still that language fails. To experience 5 months while the world outside burns through a decade. To come back calm. Darren told me the wanting is the danger. He was right. But he also came back. He chose to come back, which means the place doesn't trap you. It holds you gently and lets you go when the time is right. And if that's true, if it's not a prison but a pause, then wanting it isn't irrational. It's the most rational desire I've ever felt. I haven't gone back. I drive past the trailhead and I don't stop. My wife doesn't know about any of this. My SAR unit doesn't know. No one knows except Darren, Patricia, Corinne, and whoever is on the other end of that dead email account. And now you. I'm telling you, because the weight of carrying it alone has started to feel like its own kind of disappearance. Like I'm already partially inside something. Not the place itself, but the orbit of it. The pull. And I think if I don't say it out loud to someone, the pull will win eventually. Not next week, not next month. But someday I'll take the long way to work, and the lot will be empty, and the morning will be clear. And I'll think, 11 miles. 2,000 feet of gain. I could be there by noon. And I won't come home for 8 years. And when I do, someone will ask me where I was. And I'll say, I won't be explaining that. Because by then, I'll understand why Darren said it. Not because the answer is unspeakable. Because the answer is a door. And anyone who hears it clearly enough will start looking for their own. I'm finished. I don't have anything else. But if you're in Montana, if you hike the hyalite drainage, watch your feet in the upper basin. Watch the rocks. If it's rained recently and everything is wet except one patch, keep walking. Don't stop. Don't kneel down and touch it. Don't wonder. Just keep walking. You'll thank me later. Or you won't. Because you'll be somewhere else entirely, and time won't mean what it used to, and no one will find you no matter how hard they look. And it might be beautiful. That's the worst part. It might be the most beautiful place there is.